At my son's Christmas dinner, I handed my daughter-in-law a small envelope. She laughed. She actually laughed. Then she passed it to my son and whispered loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Is this a grocery coupon, sweetheart?" My son said nothing. He set the envelope down beside his plate and changed the subject. I drove home alone that night in my 12-year-old Honda, the roads empty and dark, and I did not cry. I had learned a long time ago that tears don't balance ledgers. The next morning, I made one phone call. Not to my son. Not to apologize. To my attorney. "Hey, quick question before we go any further. Have you ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love you most? Drop a comment. I read every single one. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe. You're going to want to stay for this one. Quick note. Some details here have been fictionalized for storytelling, but the lesson, that part is completely real. Now, let me tell you about the envelope. My name is Margaret. I am 63 years old. For the past 27 years, I have worked as a housekeeper. Not in a hotel. In private homes. I started the year my husband left, the year my son Daniel was 7 years old, and we had $42 in a joint checking account that was about to become only mine. I took the first job I could find, which was cleaning a 4-bedroom colonial on Ashford Lane for a family named Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore paid me $90 a week in cash and left a list of instructions on the kitchen counter every Monday morning. I was grateful for every dollar. I kept that job for 6 years. I added a second client in year 2, a third in year 4. By the time Daniel started middle school, I was cleaning 8 houses a week and saving everything I didn't spend on rent, groceries, and his school supplies. I bought a used vacuum that worked better than the ones my clients owned. I learned which products removed water stains from marble, how to restore hardwood floors, how to make a bathroom look like a photograph. I became very good at something most people considered invisible work. That was the point. I drove Daniel to soccer practice in a car that needed new brakes. I packed his lunches in a bag from the dollar store. I wore the same winter coat for 11 years because it still kept out the cold. My clients never knew what I was doing with my money. My son didn't know either. I wanted him to understand something before he knew the numbers. I wanted him to understand that the work itself had worth. I'm not sure he ever did. Daniel is 31 now. He married Courtney 18 months ago at a vineyard in Sonoma that cost more per hour than I made in a week. She comes from money, the quiet kind that doesn't need to announce itself, though Courtney had not yet learned that particular form of restraint. Her father is a portfolio manager. Her mother chairs a nonprofit board. They are pleasant to my face and forget I exist the moment I leave the room. My son works in commercial real estate. He wears suits that fit like they were made for him, because they were. He has his father's jaw and his mother's stubbornness, and somewhere along the way he began to be slightly ashamed of where he came from. Not openly. He was too polished for that. But I felt it in the way he introduced me at their engagement party. "This is my mom. She's been, doing her thing up in Connecticut. Doing her thing. 27 years of her thing." The Christmas dinner was at their townhouse in Westchester. A beautiful place, 3 floors, a kitchen that opened to a dining room with a table long enough to seat 12. Courtney had decorated it herself, and she had good taste. I will give her that. White candles, pine boughs, a centerpiece of white roses and eucalyptus. Everything intentional, everything designed to communicate a certain kind of life. There were 8 of us. Courtney's parents, Richard and Diane, her college roommate Sloan, and Sloan's husband, Daniel's work colleague Brett, who talked about interest rates the way other people talk about sports. And me. I had dressed carefully. A navy wool dress I'd bought 3 years ago for a client's retirement party. Low heels. My mother's pearl earrings. I looked like what I was. A woman of modest means who had made an effort. Dinner was roasted duck and a butternut squash risotto. Courtney had spent 2 days preparing. It was excellent. We were halfway through the main course when Richard turned to me with the particular smile of a man who is about to be generous. "Margaret, Daniel tells me you've been doing housekeeping for years. That must be. I mean, it's honest work." He nodded as though confirming something to himself. "It is," I said. "My mother had a cleaning woman for 30 years, Diane added. "Wonderful woman." "Rosa, the loyalty in that relationship. It's really something." I smiled and reached for my water glass. After the plates were cleared and the dessert was arranged, I took the envelope from my purse. I had wrapped it in Christmas paper, small and flat, and tied it with a thin gold ribbon. I set it beside Courtney's plate, because the gift was for them both, but I wanted her to open it. I wanted to see her face. She picked it up and tilted her head, shook it gently. There was no weight to it, no rattle. She glanced at Daniel with a look I was not supposed to catch. Should I? She started. Go ahead, I said. She slid a nail under the tape and unfolded the paper. Inside was a single card. On the card was a number. Below the number were the words, account balance as of December 1st. Below that, Hargrove Capital Partners, LLC. Courtney looked at the number. Then she looked at Daniel. Then she laughed at Daniel. Then she laughed. A short, clean, dismissive laugh. Is this a grocery coupon, sweetheart? Daniel looked at the card. I watched something move across his face. Confusion, then something that might have been embarrassment. Though I am still not sure whether it was embarrassment on my behalf or his own. He set the card beside his plate. He did not read it aloud. He picked up the conversation about Brett's ski trip to Vail that had been interrupted by dessert, and the table followed. The card sat there for the rest of the evening, face down next to the breadcrumbs. I drove home on empty roads and did not cry. That night, I unlocked the door of my apartment, the same two-bedroom I have lived in for 19 years, on the third floor of a building on Elm Street in Hartford. The radiator ticked. The refrigerator hummed. I hung up my coat and set my purse on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink. In the bedroom closet, behind the hanging garment bags and the box of Daniel's old school projects I had never managed to throw away, was the filing cabinet. Gray metal, locked with a key I kept on my keychain between the car fob and the library card. 4 drawers. I knew what was in each one. Top drawer, tax returns, going back to 1997. Second drawer, property documents. 31 of them. Third drawer, investment account statements. Hargrove Capital Partners, LLC. 12 years of quarterly reports. Bottom drawer, the folder I had not opened in 2 years. The one labeled Daniel. I did not open the filing cabinet that night. I sat in the kitchen until the tea went cold and the clock above the stove moved past midnight. I thought about the number on the card, $4.8 million. Money I had built the way I built everything. Slowly, without fanfare, reinvesting every return, never spending what I didn't need to spend, trusting the same financial advisor who had been managing the account since 2011. I had planned to give them access to that account. Not all of it. A portion, enough to pay off the townhouse, enough to eliminate the financial stress I could see in Daniel's shoulders every time Courtney mentioned renovation plans for the kitchen. I had watched my son stretch himself toward a life slightly beyond his reach for 2 years, and I had wanted to help. I had put the number on the card as an introduction, a beginning of a conversation. Instead, it had become a punchline. I went to bed. In the morning, I called my attorney. Patricia Chen had handled my affairs for 16 years. She was 60 herself, precise and calm, the kind of woman who wore no-nonsense blazers and remembered everything. I found her through a client referral when I bought my first property, a duplex on Garden Street in 2008 that everyone told me was overpriced and poorly located. The market proved them wrong within 4 years. I need to revise the trust documents, I said when she answered. All of them? She asked. The beneficiary designations. Yes. A pause. What happened? Christmas dinner. Another pause. She had known me long enough to understand what that meant without elaboration. Come in Thursday, she said. I also made a second call, to a man named Warren Briggs, who had done work for me twice before. Former Hartford PD, now private. He had the careful eyes of someone who had spent 20 years watching people lie under pressure. I need a background check, I told him. Full financial picture. A man named Daniel Harlow. I gave him my son's home address, his employer, his date of birth. Warren didn't ask why I was investigating my own son. He'd learned not to ask questions that weren't his to ask. I want to be clear about something. I was not looking for ammunition. I was not looking for a way to hurt my son. I had been watching something in him for 2 years. A tension, a restlessness, a way he sometimes avoided my eyes on the phone, and I needed to understand what it was. A mother knows when something is wrong even when she cannot name it. Warren called me 11 days later, on a Thursday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that was still hot. You're not going to like this, he said. He sent me the file by secure email an hour later. I opened it at the kitchen table with the coffee cooling beside me and read it twice. My son had a second credit card. Courtney didn't know about. He had run up $46,000 in the past 14 months. The charges were not for household expenses or business travel. They were for a woman named Brooke Ansley. Hotel stays in the city. Dinners. A weekend in Montreal. A piece of jewelry from a store on Madison Avenue that had cost more than my car. My son was having an affair. I sat with that information for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. I thought about Courtney standing in her beautiful kitchen, pouring wine, laughing about grocery coupons, unaware that her husband was spending their savings on another woman. She was not a kind person. But she did not deserve that. I also thought about my son, the little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap during thunderstorms, the teenager who called me from college the night he got his first bad grade, crying in a way he never let anyone else see, the man who had introduced me as a woman who had been doing her thing. There were 3 ways to handle this. I could call Daniel and give him the chance to confess. He would deny it, buy time, and become more careful. I could tell Courtney directly. She would confront him, there would be a crisis, and I would be the villain for looking. Or I could wait and let the pressure of the secret do what secrets eventually do. I had learned patience from 31 properties and 12 years of compound interest. I chose to wait. I did one other thing. I called Warren back and asked him to widen the search. Not just Daniel, Courtney as well, not out of spite, because I needed the full picture before I understood what protection looked like. Warren's second report came 5 days later. Courtney was clean. Her finances were straightforward. Her background was exactly what it appeared to be. But there was one detail that made me set down my coffee. Courtney's parents, Richard and Diane, were listed as co-signers on the townhouse mortgage. The property that Daniel had told me he and Courtney had purchased independently. The property he had described to Brett over Christmas dinner as one of the smartest investments we've made. He had borrowed from her parents without telling me. I did not care about the money. I cared about the pattern. My son was building a life on a foundation he did not want me to see. I thought about the Christmas card, the number on it. The laugh. I had spent 27 years building something real. I had wanted my son to know about it before he needed it, not because he was in crisis. I had wanted the gift to come from strength, not rescue. Instead, it had been dismissed before it was even read. I made 3 decisions. First, I called Patricia. We revised the trust. Not to remove Daniel, to restructure it. The account balance he had seen on that card would remain available to him, but now attached to conditions. A financial literacy provision, a requirement to meet with Patricia annually to understand the nature of the assets. Not punishment. Architecture. The kind that required him to learn before he received. Second, I called my property manager, a man named Frank DeLuca, who had managed my residential portfolio for 8 years. I told him I wanted to convert 2 of my single-family properties on the east side of Hartford into transitional housing for women exiting the foster care system. I'd been thinking about it for 2 years. The Christmas dinner made me stop thinking and start calling. Frank said, "You sure? Those 2 properties net you close to $40,000 a year." "I'm sure," I said. "Find me the right nonprofit to partner with." Third, I did nothing about my son's affair. Not yet. That was his reckoning to face. But I was going to make sure he faced it honestly, not in private, not in a way he could manage and minimize. He'd had earned that. The week before Easter, Courtney called me. She'd never called me before without Daniel on the line. Margaret. Her voice was different. Quieter. The performance of easy confidence she usually carried was gone. "I need to talk to you. Can I come up?" "When?" "Tomorrow, if that's all right." She arrived at 11 in the morning in a coat I had not seen before. Her hair pulled back, no makeup except a little concealer that wasn't quite hiding the dark circles beneath her eyes. She looked like someone who had not been sleeping. I made coffee and set it on the table between us. She told me everything she knew, which was less than I did. She had found a charge on a shared expense account. A hotel in Midtown. She had asked Daniel, and he had tried to explain it as a work event, and she had pressed, and he had finally admitted there was a situation he had been trying to end. He used that word. A situation. He had been trying to end. He used that word. A situation. Courtney had called her mother that night, and her mother had advised her to stay calm and gather information before making any decisions. So she had come to me. I looked at my daughter-in-law across my kitchen table. I thought about the Christmas dinner, the laugh, the card placed face down in the breadcrumbs. I could have said, "You chose him, this is your problem." Instead I said, "I know more than you do, and you deserve to hear all of it." I told her what Warren had found, not to wound her, but because she needed the complete picture to make a clear decision. I watched her face move through something I recognized. Not surprise, exactly, but the terrible confirmation of something she had half known and been afraid to fully see. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because you came to me honestly, and because whatever you decide, you should decide it knowing the truth." She looked at me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have listened?" She looked down at her coffee. "No," she said after a moment. "Probably not." We sat for a while longer. The radiator ticked. She asked me about the Christmas card. About the number on it. I told her what it meant. The account, the history behind it, the 27 years of early mornings and late nights in houses that weren't mine. She listened the way people listen when they understand they have misunderstood something fundamental. I laughed, she said. You did. I didn't even read it. I know. I'm sorry, Margaret. I told her the same thing I believed to be true. An apology is a beginning, not an ending. What matters is what comes after it. The confrontation happened on a Saturday in March at my apartment. This was not my plan. It became the plan the way most necessary things become inevitable, through a series of small decisions that accumulate into something that can't be undone. Daniel arrived first. Courtney had told him only that they needed to talk, and that they were going to my apartment. He walked in looking like a man who had been slightly confused for several weeks and was trying to appear as though he hadn't been. He hugged me. He smelled like the same cologne he had worn since college. Courtney arrived 8 minutes later. She had brought a folder. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table between them and did not pretend this was a casual visit. Daniel looked at the folder in Courtney's hands. He looked at me. He was beginning to understand. Mom, he said carefully. What's going on? Your wife came to me last week, I said. She deserved to know the truth. I told her what I knew. Now I think it's time you sat in a room with both of us and answered for it without managing the story. He started to speak. I held up my hand. I am not here to punish you, I said. I am here because I love you and because love sometimes requires this. I gestured at the table, at Courtney, at all of it. You have been building your life on things you thought I couldn't see. The debt, the affair, the way you borrowed from her parents without telling me and told your friends you'd done it alone. I saw all of it. Daniel's face had gone through several expressions and settled on something raw and still. You hired someone, he said. Yes. Why? Because I watched something in you close off for 2 years and I needed to understand what was behind the door. Courtney slid the folder across the table. It contained the hotel receipts, the credit card statements, a summary Warren had put together. Daniel did not reach for it. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at his wife. I was going to end it, he said. You were ending it with money we didn't have, she said, and her voice was steady in a way I respected. You were ending it with $46,000 while telling me we couldn't afford to fix the roof. He didn't answer. I said, Daniel, look at me. He did. I handed you a card at Christmas with a number on it that represented 27 years of my work. You let your wife laugh at it, and you said nothing. You were embarrassed by me. You have been embarrassed by me for years, and I need you to understand something about that. He opened his mouth. I am not asking for an apology, I said. I am asking you to understand what that embarrassment cost you. Not money. Yourself. You spent 2 years trying to become someone impressive enough to deserve a table you thought I didn't fit at, and while you were doing that, you made choices that almost cost you everything that actually mattered. The kitchen was very quiet. I have 31 properties, I said. I have built a portfolio worth more than $8 million. I did it alone after your father left, with a vacuum cleaner and a savings account and the discipline to never spend more than I earned. I never told you because I wanted you to know who I was before you knew what I had. I wanted to know whether you valued my character or my net worth. Daniel's eyes were wet. He didn't look away. I failed that, he said. You did, I said. But you're here. That counts. Courtney and Daniel left 2 hours later. Not holding hands, not fixed, but with the truce between them, which is the only real foundation anything can be built on. They had agreed to see a counselor. Courtney had told him she needed time. Daniel had told her he was willing to give her whatever she needed. I believed neither of them completely and both of them a little, which is the honest position to hold when a marriage is deciding whether to survive. 3 months later, I stood in front of 2 freshly renovated houses on Maple Avenue in East Hartford. Frank stood beside me with a clipboard. 6 young women moved boxes through the front doors. 20-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, one who was barely 19, all of them transitioning out of foster care, all of them starting adult lives without a family structure to fall back on. The nonprofit director, a woman named Carla Hughes, shook my hand at the door. Why this population? She asked me. Because nobody should have to start from nothing without a floor beneath them, I said. The moving had been happening for 2 hours when Daniel's car pulled up behind mine. He got out in jeans and a work shirt, no suit. He had a box of cleaning supplies in his arms. Frank told me, he said. I looked at him. I figured you could use an extra set of hands. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at my son standing on the sidewalk in front of houses I had bought with money, I had earned cleaning other people's homes. I thought about the Christmas dinner. The envelope. The laugh. There's a mop in the truck, I said. The bathroom on the second floor still needs work. He nodded, walked to the truck, found the mop. I watched him go inside. That evening, I returned to my apartment on Elm Street. The same 2-bedroom, the same radiator tick, the same view of the parking lot I had lived at for 19 years. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that I actually drank while it was still warm. On the wall beside the kitchen window, I had framed the Christmas card. The small flat card that had been passed over, laughed at, placed face down in the crumbs. It was framed now between 2 pieces of glass mounted on a square of ivory mat. The number was visible. Below it, in my handwriting, I had added one line. This is what 27 years looks like. My phone rang. Daniel's name on the screen. I answered on the second ring. Mom. His voice was quiet. I've been thinking about what you said. About knowing who you were before knowing what you had. Yes? I think I knew who you were. I just convinced myself it wasn't enough. A pause. That was about me, not you. I let that sit for a moment. I know, I said. I want to do better. You already started, I said, this afternoon with the mop. He laughed. A small, real laugh. There's another property coming available in May, I said. 2-family on Burnside Avenue. I'm going to need someone to walk through it and tell me if the bones are good. Silence on the other end. Then, are you asking me to help? I'm asking if you know anything about building something worth keeping. A longer pause. I'm starting to learn, he said. Good, I said. That's a better starting place than most people get. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. About the weather. About a restaurant Courtney had read about that he thought I might like. Small things. The ordinary material of people choosing to stay connected. After I hung up, I opened the filing cabinet in the bedroom. 3rd drawer. Hargrove Capital Partners. I pulled out the folder and looked at the most recent statement. The number had not changed from what I had written on the Christmas card. It was still there, patient the way honest money always is. I had built it cleaning floors and washing windows and driving a 12-year-old Honda and wearing a coat until it wore out. I had built it in invisibility, while people like Richard and Diane had conversations about honest work over roasted duck, while my son introduced me as a woman doing her thing, while my daughter-in-law passed my card across the table like something she expected to be entertaining. None of them had been looking at what I was actually doing. That had been the point, once. Now it was no longer necessary. The envelope had been a beginning, not of revenge, of clarity. I put the folder back in the drawer and locked the cabinet and went to bed. There is something I want to say to you before this ends, and I want to say it plainly. I spent 27 years being underestimated, and I used every one of those years. Not to prove something to the people who doubted me. That was never the goal. I used them to build something that would outlast the doubt. A property portfolio. A trust. 2 houses full of young women who had nowhere else to start. A son who showed up with a mop. The work was never the problem. The work was the answer. If someone in your life is making you feel like your job defines your worth, let me tell you what I know to be true. Dignity is not in the title on your name tag. It is in what you do with what you earn, what you build with what you have, who you show up for when it counts. I was a housekeeper. I am a housekeeper, and I built something that will house families long after I am gone. The Christmas card is still on my wall. I look at it every morning when I make my tea, not as a reminder of the laugh, as a reminder of what the laugh cost and what it started. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. I read everyone. Tell me, have you ever been written off by someone who didn't know what they were looking at? Subscribe to Quartz Revenge for more stories about ordinary people who built extraordinary things while no one was paying attention. Because the most powerful thing you can do is keep going when they've already decided you're done. God gave us dignity in our labor. He gave us patience as protection. He gave us the discipline to outlast what tries to diminish us. That Christmas dinner was not my defeat. It was my beginning. And the card? It wasn't a grocery coupon. It never was. I spent 27 years being invisible, and I want to be honest with you about something. I chose that invisibility, not because I was ashamed of what I was building, but because I understood something early that most people learn too late. The people who underestimate you quietly are the same people who reveal themselves completely when they believe you have nothing. Courtney laughed at that envelope because she had already decided what I was. A housekeeper. A woman in a department store dress sitting at a table that wasn't really meant for her. She didn't read the card because she didn't believe it could contain anything worth reading. And my son let her laugh because somewhere along the way he had started to see me through her eyes instead of his own. Those were choices. Small ones, in the moment. But choices compound the same way money does, and by Christmas night, they had accumulated into something neither of them could easily walk back from. That is the first thing I know to be true. How you treat people when you believe they have nothing tells everything about your character and nothing about theirs. The second thing I know is this. I was not a good mother in every way. I withheld the truth from my son for years, telling myself it was a lesson in values when part of it was also pride. I wanted to be proven right. I wanted to watch him recognize my worth without being handed the evidence. That rigidity cost us time we cannot get back, and I own that. The work ethic I built was real. The wall I built around it was not wisdom. It was self-protection dressed up as philosophy. If you are keeping something important from someone you love because you are waiting for them to deserve it, I want you to ask yourself honestly whether the waiting is for their benefit or yours. The third thing is about what I did with what I had built. I could have kept those 2 houses on Maple Avenue as rental income. The numbers were clear and the return was reliable. But there is a point at which accumulation stops being a goal and starts being a habit, and habits that have outlived their purpose become weights. I turned those properties into something that would house young women who had no floor to fall back on, and I want to say plainly that this was not generosity in the sentimental sense. It was a decision rooted in clarity. I had been that person once. A woman with very little, doing her best in a city that wasn't paying attention. I knew what a floor felt like when someone offered you one. The work gave me the means. The clarity told me what to do with them. Daniel showed up with a mop. That mattered more to me than any apology he could have offered, because an apology is a statement about the past, and a mop is a commitment to the present. Character is not what you feel in your best moments. It is what you do in the ordinary ones, when no one is awarding you for it and nothing is guaranteed. I raised him to understand that. He forgot it for a while. He is remembering, whatever you are building right now, quietly, without recognition, in the early mornings and the late nights while other people are elsewhere. Keep going. The envelope was never the point. The 27 years were.